Lloyd Vance's Insider Football is back for another week on 1029 The Game and the Broad Street South Network. So glad that everybody can join us this evening. Lots to get to around the NFL. I always say the NFL never sleeps, and there's always much to talk about. And we're going to bring in, he did so well last time, we're going to bring him back in. Jovan Alford from Total Sports Live is going to be our featured co-host this week. So glad that he can join us. And I'm just going to throw all kinds of topics at him. And Jovan, how you doing this evening?
I'm doing good, Lloyd. I'm glad to be back on. I'm glad to make the cut to come back for another week. So I'm glad to be talking some ball with you.
Yeah, it's crazy. Everybody always says, oh, well, and you always kind of go through withdrawal after the Super Bowl. I know I do, and it's just like, oh, man, what do we watch now? Now, I am still kind of, I watch a little NBA. My sons are more into pro ball than I used to be at this point. And I watch some Phillies here and there, but, it's still number one, always the NFL and mostly the Eagles because I'm in the Philadelphia area moving a dial. But, we'll jump right into it. Speaking of the Eagles, a big thing is WrestleMania 40 will be at Lincoln Financial Field in about a week or so. And news is coming out that they are trying to get Jason Kelsey to join the festivities. Would you tune in to watch Kelsey, and are you a wrestling guy?
I used to be a wrestling person, like watching it like avidly, like SmackDown, Raw, like things like that. Probably the last, probably when John Cena was on his like ascension, but then like after that,
Yeah.
I kind of like tuned out of it. But will I watch it with Kelsey? Maybe not, but I'll definitely be tuned into the clips. If he does
Yeah,
show up
it's
in the
going.
ring, I will be watching every clip.
Well, he likes to rip his shirt off and all that stuff. So I'm sure he'll. They say they're negotiating a appearance fee. I'm sure they'll work that out. But yeah, I'm kind of like you. I don't really watch it anymore. After my son turned about 12 or so, and he wasn't into it anymore. I was. I wasn't. But there are people that pay big money to go see that, and Lincoln Financial Field holds about 70,000 people for a football game. So I'm thinking if the weather's good, they're going to have probably that many. And they brought Dwayne the Rock Johnson back into the mix. So, but that's enough with WWE. One of the key things, Jovan, last week was the NFL players meetings occurred, and I wanted to get your take on. They've kicked around a lot of things in terms of the rule book, and there's changes coming, non-changes. I'll just throw a couple of the things that came out. The hip drop tackle. Now, I've been watching football a long time, and when a guy's in open field, particularly a running back or somebody running free, a DB has no choice. The guy's larger, and he needs to get him on the ground. So I think this is going to be controversial with the hip drop. Can you imagine? Somebody showed a clip from one of the old Super Bowls. I think it was Kevin Dyson being tackled by Mike Jones, and it was basically a hip drop tackle at the goal line. And can you imagine they throw the flag there, and then the Titans would get another play? So what are you thinking in terms of this hip drop? And is it going to be, like they've kind of worked in a horse collar, out of the game, and it's a penalty. You don't see it as much, but I just think this occurs a lot more.
Yeah, the hip drop tackle. Trying to put penalize on that, I think that's going to be tough because for a lot of these guys, it's reaction, right? Like it's
Yeah.
what they do. Like you said, if you're a smaller guy, that's almost your initial reaction to do, right? You can't go at a guy's knees because you're going to get penalized for doing that. So what's the next best thing? If I see a bigger guy, there's maybe the Rob Gronkowski's or the Kelseys or the Goddards going in the middle of the field. Like what's your next best plan of action to try to stop him? Where you see a running back, coming down the middle of the field, what are you going to do? So I think it's going to be tough for those guys, for defenders, even though for the hip drop, just because, like I said, it's what they do. It's a natural reaction. So now you have to almost kind of have these guys like unteach themselves to do something that they've been doing for probably a long time, that in their mind they didn't think like, I'm not doing this maliciously, right? Like I'm not trying to, hip drop a guy and he, breaks his leg or, fibula
Yeah,
or anything of of that nature. So I think it's gonna be tough for, defenders, but I think they'll find a way to work around it. It's just gonna be, you don't want to have those penalties if they do occur, in that moment. Like you said, the whole Kevin Dyson thing, like that was a hip drop. And imagine
yeah,
if that did happen in the Super Bowl,
right.
like you said. And now, so on the one, we're talking controversy. So you hope that doesn't come into play this year, because unlike in what was that, 2000, 2001, when there wasn't no social media, that would be a big thing now, in 2024.
Yeah, and can you imagine a defender trying to tackle Earl Campbell or Christian Okoye
Come on
anyway?
now.
You know what I mean? Hip drop or not, they're just trying to get that guy on the ground. And I think a lot of times that we've been talking the last couple of years in terms of um, defenders lowering their head and
Hmm.
delivering a blow. We see that a lot with running backs, and I
Oh
still think
yeah.
they don't call that where they initiate the contact. And I know everybody's talking about CT and concussions and all that stuff, but the rules are just so hard to you know put them in action in live
Right.
game action, and these guys are so big, so fast. And I know our buddy Rich Q and I always talk about how these officials have gotten worse over the years. You know what I mean? So it's going to
Yes.
be interesting to see how they legislate this new rule with the hip drop. So I think we can safely say two thumbs down on that one. I know it's for the safety of the game. They said there was about 25 of those plays last year that caused people to get injured for an extensive period of time. But I just think it's maybe an overreaction, almost like when Tom Brady got hit low at the knees, and then now a defender who's just trying to get the quarterback on the ground, they can't hit the quarterback in the knee. So we'll see how that one is. The other big one, Javon, I want to talk to you about is I think they're trying to help players like Josh Cribbs, Devin Hester. These guys were return specialists,
Hmm.
and they're changing all the. They're realigning the NFL kickoff rule. They saw last year that only about 5% of kicks or so were being returned. So now there's going to be, uh, they're going to have a new alignment in terms of kickoffs, and players are not going to be able to move until the ball has ends up in a landing. So it's basically they stole it from the XFL. They don't want to say it. You
Yeah,
know the NFL.
exactly.
The NFL thought they created everything, but they know it. They stole this from the XFL, and they're trying to put some more excitement in terms of kickoffs and also watch on the injuries because the way the players can line up and kinds of blocking formations they can use. What do you think about these new kickoff rules?
Oh, I'm excited as someone that, watch, spring football over the years, especially the XFL, seeing how they were able to innovate, kickoffs by making it safe. Number one, where you don't have guys just flying down the field, just like knocking
Yeah.
each other out. It's almost like they're meeting at like almost like a tug of war type thing. Like they're meeting at the spot
Okay.
while allowing the returner to kind of get that open space to kind of, start cooking. So I think it's going to be a fun rule. I think for teams that have good special teams is going to be excellent. Like if you're talking about Green Bay, like Keyshawn Nixon, I think on Twitter, I think he was excited about the
Yeah.
new rule. Like a guy like him, like he's going to do amazing. Dallas with Cavante Turpin, I can only imagine, what he's going to be able to do, with this new return. So I think it's definitely going to help the game a little bit, make more exciting, because how many times we see a kickoff and it's a touchback, guy automatically puts his hands out. It's like, all
Yeah, it
right,
was
time to
crazy. Like especially last year, a
right,
guy could fair catch a ball. He's fair catching it at like the 30 or wherever.
right.
It's like a pooch kickoff, and he's just like, "Oh, we're just going to take it here." It's just crazy. And I always did love, like Devin Hester. He's going to the Hall of Fame this year, which is great. You want to see guys like him and special teams be recognized. It was just excitement when he went
Hmm.
back there, and it's such a big play. It's a game altering play, and right now, like you said, it was like what 5% or so, and it was just like, oh, okay, it's a touchback. Why are we even doing this? They were even talking about doing away with it. I think this is a better idea in terms of just bringing the kickoff back and getting some excitement back to it. Now, another thing we talked about the referees earlier, and we're talking with Jovan Alford here on Lloyd Vance Insider Football on Sports Radio 1029 The Game and the Broad Street South Network. Another thing that came out of the spring meetings was they're going to be able to review when a passer is down by contact or out of bounds as they're throwing the football. So, like, this will bring into play like a lot of those. I'll call this almost like the Patrick Mahomes deal.
Hmm.
How often do you see him? The knee's about 1 inch from the ground, or it might be
Right.
on the ground, and he flings it out of bounds, and they don't call intentional grounding. And the other side, I think this happened even in the Super Bowl. The Niners fans were like, "Come on, that's intentional grounding." If there's anybody else, they're calling it on them. So, what do you think about that? The ability to review that?
I think that I think that's good. I think especially when we're talking about intentional grounding, not intentional grounding, like that. Depending on when that happens during the game, like it could change the entire complexity of instead of because say if that guy completes the pass, right? Instead you're going from maybe a second and third and short to lost it down, or we're going back 10, 15 yards, and now it's a second and 22 or a third and 20 something. So it makes a huge difference. So it's good to see the league, continuing to try to clean up on these things to kind of show like, hey, we're taking some type of strides to make sure
Right,
that we're showing fans everything because I think that's key, right? Having that type of transparency to look at certain things. Now, granted, we still haven't gotten to that level yet where they're gonna, review certain things, but I think this is a good start to try to see like, okay, intentional grounding. Let's see if we can kind of get that down packed because, like you said, if a guy like Mahomes, right, like you said, how many times he'll extend the play 5, 10 seconds, then he'll be on one
yeah,
leg and the other knee is somehow, like you said, just an inch off the ground. And the human eye will tell us like that's intentional grounding, right?
yeah,
Then when you go back to the highlights and when you can go back to the vid and be like, oh, it actually wasn't because he had like one
yeah.
inch off the ground. So I think that was another good rule by the league.
Yeah, and I'm interested to see if eventually, and I was watching a little UFL, and Dean Blandino was on there. He's a fish skating guy, and they have the eye in the sky, and they're reviewing
Yep.
everything, and they're doing it
That's
quickly. You
so
know what I
good.
mean? And that's always been the thing with the NFL, where they just take so long to review these things, and the games are getting longer, and anybody can see it. You know what I mean? And then
Hmm.
magically, they always come back, and they're like, "The ruling stands," and they
Right.
don't explain it. You know what I mean? So I just don't know if that ever comes to that point, but we've seen it in the past. Think about that play. The New Orleans Saints were denied going probably to the Super Bowl, where the receiver gets blasted by the Rams DB,
Yeah.
and they
Who was that?
everyone
Bradley Roby. Yeah,
right, and
Bradley Roby
everyone knew
caught
it
it.
was a penalty,
Right.
but they're like, nope, not a penalty, and it wasn't reviewable. So they got to figure out a way to fix this. I still always say the officials need to work their way up.
Hmm.
Whether it's like baseball, since the minor leagues have these guys work the UFL high level college football games like Big Ten, SEC, as they
Hmm.
can get prepared, and then also make them full time, and then make them have that their job where they're full time referee and officials, and they have to move up the ranks. So one of the other rules that was changed now, and I like this one. This is a third challenge if you've had one of your first two successful, and we've seen that in the past where the game's coming down to the crunch, but it's not in the last 2 minutes or so where
Right.
it's a booth review. Um, they're like, well, he doesn't have any more challenges. He can't throw a flag on that. So, what are you thinking on that? Where they're getting basically another challenge if one of the first two is correct?
I think that's good. I think you're rewarding the system, right? If the coach
Yeah,
believes this is reviewable and hey, throw the flag out, let's see what happens, and they win the challenge, then yeah, they should definitely get another one because like how many times have we seen it? Not even when we get to the fourth quarter within those 2 minutes, but even in the third quarter, there's something that happens. A guy you think catches a touchdown or gets a first down, but the ball is still like kind of like he hits the ground and the ball is like jarring a little
right.
from the like, well, we can't review that because like you said, we don't have that extra challenge in the back of your in their back pocket. So I think for coaches, I think you got to be excited about that because it could help win a game or yeah, help win a game. It definitely won't lose a game. It'll keep you in it. So that's another rule. I think again, NFL they got it. They got it right with those
Yeah,
extra challenges.
and it's going to reward coaches that are good at
Yeah,
instant replay and reviews. And we know who's not. And we for years when I covered Andy Reid, he was not good. You're like, what are you throwing a
no,
flag
he
for that
wasn't.
there? Wasting challenges and anybody could tell. It was like no. He even did that a couple times this season. I watched Chiefs games where he
Hmm.
wasted bad. He's calling. Um, it's like a huge clot of bodies, and he's like, "I'm challenging the spot there," and they're not going to overturn it,
Nah.
But he tried anyway. But yeah, the coaches, this will teach them to be successful with it. I always thought coaches should have a guy in a booth. There's so many coaches on a staff. I remember a couple years ago with Bruce Arians, they must have had about 30, 40 guys on his
Yeah.
staff. Why not have a coach specifically that's his job to be in the booth, review that stuff, and buzz the coach when they know it's a good challenge? So, yeah, I definitely think that that's going to be a good addition to the upcoming season. And we're talking rules and what happened in the spring meetings with Jovan Alford of was it Total Sports Live?
Yes.
That's where people can hit him up, and he's also on X, formerly Twitter, and it's at Jovan. What is it? Which is
10.
with
Yep.
at
At
Jovan
Jovan 10.
10. So check him out there. Very good insight. We're so glad to get him back, and we're here on Lloyd Vance Inside Football on 102.9 The Game, the Broad Street South Network. As always, Angel in the back doing all the great work on the ones and twos. Um, Now, let's talk about what was not removed. So there were rule changes that came up, and people were like, "Nah, we're going to leave that be." And I think we might have talked about this last time, but this is just such a big play, especially here in Philadelphia. The tush push will live for another season. What do you, what do you think of that? And I think it's going to drastically change for the Eagles. I was talking to Q about this because there's no Kelsey. He's one of the
Yep.
best at it. He gets so
Yes.
low, and that is the key for the Eagles. So, what do you think about tush push staying around for another season?
Not surprised. I mean, if you can't take a rule away because a team's good at it, right? And the Eagles have came up with this innovative way, almost like how when the Wildcat first happened, like there was teams that were good at it and teams that were just like, no, you should never run the Wildcat ever again. And this is the same thing with the touch push. Like there's team Eagles are great at it, and then others that just don't understand the concept, which what you said, is pertinent for the Eagles next year, right? Not having Kelsey, he kind of helps that, right? Everybody says, well, you have the running backs and the wide receivers pushing, and you have the quarterback that can squat 600 pounds, which is all very true, right? But
Right.
the low man wins, right? And Kelsey was very good at being the low man. So I think good for the NFL again for not penalizing the Eagles for being good at for being good at it. And we've seen, the Eagles run different plays off of the touch push, getting into that formation. So I think that's going to probably give them more creativity because now, like I said, they don't have no Kelsey, maybe putting Cam Jurgens in that spot there. So maybe the
Yeah.
Eagles will show us the tush push, but we might not see it a ton, but they might run like 10 million different plays off of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking, yeah, I remember the Eagles one time came to the line of scrimmage, and then they did the fake, and the guy on the outside was wide open. And,
Yep.
and you're going to see variations on it. And you're going to see the offense take that into the lab. And of course, the defense is going to take it in the lab and try to figure out how to stop it. So, as you said, the NFL always kinds of works these things out. And
Mm-hmm.
why not? It does bend the rules. I read the actual rule and everything, talk about in terms of is it really a push or the pulling and all that. But why not let them figure it out on the field? So, yeah, keep the tush push. I know a lot of Dallas fans and other, there's a lot of Eagles haters out there that we know of. They're going to say,
Yeah.
get rid of it. But so that stays the big one, and Rich and I talked about this, the ball going out of the end zone and being a touchback.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to stick around. They decided not to do anything with that, but I think that's really a rule. They got to look at it again. Talking about spring football, I think I read the UFL there. They get at the spot of the foul. I mean, at the spot of the fumble. That's where the ball goes back to. But it's not a change of possession, which is such a big thing in the NFL. I think this year we saw the Ravens. I think it was or the Niners. I can't remember which team it was in the playoffs. They lost the possession because the player fumbled the ball out of bounds right before he was about to score.
Oh yeah, who was that? It was that Zay Flowers?
I think it
That
was
was
Zay
it.
Flowers by the Ravens. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and that, like you said, a huge play. That ball goes, like you said, touchback. That changes the complete momentum. That changes everything. Everybody's deflated. It changes the complexity. And I agree with you. I think that's something that has to be changed because not. I think when it comes to that and just those type of turnovers, like it shouldn't be something that should be penalized against the offense. Like you lost the ball, like it's your fault. Like no, the defense made a good play. If the ball goes out of bounds, like you said, like let the ball come back and you know let the defense try to make that stop. Now,
right.
if the defense recovers it, then it's a whole different story, right? Then obviously they should get the ball back. But when we're talking about rolling into the end zone, like that's nobody's fault. Like it just happens. So yeah, I agree with you. I think it's definitely something that they have to keep on reviewing and checking because it's not a play that's going to just disappear, right? These things are going to continuously, happen.
Yeah, and one of the last one we'll talk about in terms of rules, and this one was initiated by the Eagles, and as soon as I heard it, I was like, no way they're going to allow this. Number one, it was I think an XFL rule, and they are trying to get um, onside kicks back or that late game urgency back into football because we know onside kicks, the way formations are allowed and this and that,
Mm-hmm.
it's basically non-existent. I think there was one or two onside kicks recovered last year by the team that kicked the ball. So what the Eagles were posing, and I think it was, I'm not sure if it was USFL or XFL or the new league, they used to have a 4th and 20. They would say, all right, put the ball on like the 20-yard line and let the team have a 4th and 20, see if they can convert that and keep the ball
Mm-hmm.
moving towards the end zone. So they said that was just too wild and too crazy. Do you think something needs to be done about the onside kick or instituting this 4th and 20? What are your thoughts on that?
I was disappointed that there wasn't more teams that were voting for that because I think it's a great play in my opinion. It's a great decision. Like I said, I've watched spring football the last couple of years and even watching the XFL last year. That excitement of knowing like, hey, you might be down 15 points, but if you score that touchdown, like the game's not over as long as you convert that
Right,
4th and 15. I think in the XFL it's like 4th and 15 or 4th and 20. I think it's one of those two things. Like having that ability to know, like, hey, like the probability of our team, converting a 4th and 15 is way much higher than guys line up on an onside kick where they got their hands team and before you kick the ball, hands team's already got it. So I'm disappointed the league didn't do it because I think that would bring even much more excitement to the game, just knowing like, okay, like our team's like not out of it with like 2 minutes left. Like we score ball real quick and we can get this 4th and 15. And who's to even say a 4th and 15 is even, easy to convert? Like,
right,
especially when the defense knows you got to get past the sticks. Like you just got to make sure to keep them in front of you. So I'm disappointed because I love the rule in spring football. It makes the game so much fun because you just don't know, the game's
right,
never over. And even when we were watching spring football this weekend, and there was a couple games that came down to the wire because they have their extra point rule is like a 1 point, 2 point, 3 point rule. So if you
right.
get those extra points and you get that 4 15, like you're feeling distract. It takes strategy to a whole nother level. So I'm kind of sad the NFL didn't approve that because I thought it would have just made the games like that
Yeah,
much more fun.
yeah. It's going to be interesting because the NFL's old school guys. You know what I mean? And they're
Yeah.
like, this is the way it's been, and this is the way we're always going to do it. And they know they're the number one game gone. We know the Super Bowl is the most watched TV program in the history of television. So they know folks are going to come back and no matter what. But I think it will bring excitement to the game. And then Jovan is actually, he's a gambling guy. Like he talks about the lines and looks at some things. And what do you think that would do in terms of like, because they have online betting. You can tell me about it where at any point in the game. So can you imagine if they're like the odds change? They're like, all right, they're going for fourth and 15 here rather than onside kick it, and they converted, and I think people would definitely stay in tune to their app a lot
Oh
more,
yeah. Oh
if
yeah,
they did something
easily.
like this.
Oh, easily, because you're almost, I would say, as a better, you would even almost try to project, like, okay, like, if I know the team is down 10, but they got a chance to score either a touchdown or field goal, get the ball back, you might feel more comfortable taking them as the underdog. Like, hey, there might be that chance. Or if
Yeah,
you're sweating that over, you might be like, hey, this over might actually hit because they actually have a chance, to get into the end zone. And I've seen it obviously play out this first weekend of spring
yeah,
football where that happens, where you're kind of, if you're on the under end and that kind of situation happens, you're kind of sweating it out. But if you're trying to pull for that underdog, there is that, you still have that glimmer of chance, like, hey, like, I might want to take a chance because I know they're not depending on a play that, on an onside kick that doesn't rarely happen. At least I know they got a
yeah.
4th and 15 play that they got in their playbook that could potentially get them the first down. Now after that, you got to move. You can't just, hey, we got the 4th and
Right.
15 and we can just chill. Like, no, you got to get on the ball and you got to keep pushing.
Yeah, the lines makers that definitely drive them crazy. The guys at the Bellagio and all those other sport books, they're like, oh man. So something interesting to watch, and it's they make rules and all that, and the pros. But as Jovan was saying, it takes 20. I think it takes 26 out of the 32
Yeah.
franchises to approve any of these rule changes, and a lot of times, I remember the year. When the Kansas City Chiefs were talking about hair hanging out of the helmet, you know what I mean? They were talking about the players would have to secure that, and not have their hair hanging out of the helmet. That didn't pass, and a lot of times it's just a lot of conjecture, and then the rule just kindly goes away. So we're talking to Jovan Alford on 1029 The Game, Broad Street South Network. This is Lloyd Vance's Insider Football. Uh, so the next big thing, Jovan, is obviously everybody's preparing for the draft, and teams are getting their off-season rosters together. So teams they'll have 90 players coming into training camp, so they have a lot of spots to fill. Now, an interesting story is right here in Philadelphia, where we are. Um, the Philadelphia Eagles. This was a mind-boggling, head-scratching trade to me. The Eagles decide to trade Hassan Reddick, a double-digit sack guy who was under contract for this season, because there was a potential holdout. They trade him to the New York Jets. Obviously, there's a relationship there between Howie Roseman and Joe Douglas, who's their general manager. They trade him for a 2026, and 2026 third round pick. So a couple of years from now, the Eagles could get a third rounder or possibly a second rounder if he plays 67.5% of the snaps or gets 10 sacks in 2024. But, I was saying this to Q earlier. There's nowadays there is no player holdouts. Basically, if you're under contract, they can fine you up to over $40,000 per day for
Right.
missed camp time. So guys just aren't holding out like they used to back in the day. I just didn't think there was a threat of that. Yes, the Eagles signed Bryce Huff, who's a 10 sack guy from the Jets. But I still think Hassan Reddick at 29 years old, he still had enough left in the tank, was a difference maker. And obviously he didn't fit in the scheme that they had. But I just didn't like this trade. What did you think about it?
Yeah, I felt the same way as you. I didn't like the trade. It was kind of puzzling because it kind of seemed like, obviously, the reports were like they were either going to keep one or the other, right? Him or Josh Sweat, or maybe both of them would be gone, right? But
Yeah.
obviously they keep Sweat, and then when you sign a guy like Bryce Huff, you kind of see the writing on the wall. But it's hard to replace a guy that had 27 sacks in the last 2 seasons. Like, that doesn't grow on trees. Like, I'm sorry, like, pass rushers of that skill that can get to the quarterback and disrupt the game like he can, and a guy who I feel like is in his prime, like, this is his best years that we're seeing right now. A guy that's had double digit sacks, what, the last 4 years on 3 different teams?
Yes.
Like, that's unheard of. Like, and he's only a year removed from 2022 where he had 16 sacks. So the fact that you move on from him, it puts a lot of pressure on his Eagles defensive line, especially at the edge spots where they don't have a lot of depth. Obviously, Brandon Graham will be back for one more year, but how much do you really expect Brandon Graham to give you at 35? You don't expect him to be the sack
Yeah.
machine. So you're really pinning your hopes on Josh Sweat, Bryce Huff, who, like you said, had 10 sacks, but more of the rotational guy. Can he be that and more? And then you're putting a lot on the plate of Nolan Smith, who you drafted in the first round. So it's a very dicey situation. And after that, you don't really have much depth either. So it's going to be tough. It kind of tells me that they're also going to definitely address that spot in the draft. Like they're
Yeah, I
going
believe
to
so. Yeah.
try to get a pass rusher, which is what their specialty is. They love their trenches on either side of the ball, but still, to see a guy like Hassan Reddick, to see them trade him for like you said, a 2026 pick, which is, I know fans, there are some fans that love it. Like, hey, you get draft capital that you can use for something else, but it's like you can't
They
think
would have
about
got a
that.
compensatory pick similar
Right.
to that if he had
Exactly.
signed somewhere else.
Exactly. So I don't see the rhyme or reason for it. You just hope that this defensive line, especially those edge guys, can step up because, like I said, it's hard to duplicate what Hassan Reddick did the last couple of years, and now this is a defense also without Fletcher Cox too. So it's a
Right.
defense in transition that's going to be tested early, and they're going to depend on a lot of young kids to kind of step up.
And you knew they needed to redo that defense after all the
Hmm.
points that they allowed. But and the thing was, you go from 70 sacks the year before in the Super Bowl, and you lead the NFL, I think, in that category, to I think it was around 40 or so this season,
Yeah.
and they just during that horrible stretch, losing 6 out of the last 7 games. They just were not getting any pressure on a quarterback. And Hassan Reddick is a guy, as we both said, they need him. This new scheme that we're going to see if Fangio is a great elixir. They're all saying, with Sean Desai and the way he was using guys like Reddick, making him drop in coverage. Well, Fangio uses some of those similar schemes. But a big guy, as you said, is Nolan Smith. Can he make that big step going into next season? What are we thinking when we talk about Nolan Smith? Everybody was so excited getting the Eagles getting him at the end of the first round last season, and he was a dynamic player for the University of Georgia, but something was amiss last season.
Yeah, something like you said, something definitely was a miss because you would think with the struggles that the Eagles defense was having, especially getting home, right? Because they got home early in the season, but then it just kind of dissipated. You would think that a guy like Nolan Smith, young rookie, that they could say, "Hey, we need you to just come in and get to the pass rusher and get to the quarterback and just go." And it didn't necessarily happen. Like you said, we don't know what that was. Could have been Sean Desai, could have been the switch to Matt Patricia, could have been the defense just didn't know what they were doing because they had two different guys and two different philosophies trying to say do this and do that in the third. But he has a ton of talent, right? I think, like you said, we saw it coming out of Georgia. Like the guy can get to the quarterback. His athleticism, his speed off the edge is something that you just can't teach. So it's going to be like how Vic Fangio were able to get stuff out of Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips. This year in Miami, like that's, I think if you're an Eagles fan, I think that's what you hope he becomes, like
Right.
what Jalen Phillips was this year before he got hurt on Black Friday. Like if he had that type of production in his second year, then I think fans should be happy with the progression of Nolan Smith.
Yeah, the Jalen Phillips did become a game wrecker for that defense, and unfortunately, the Dolphins probably have more injuries than anybody on terms of their defense. Um, but they were still a quality team, and
Hmm.
we're going to transition here on Lloyd Vance Insider Football on 102.9 The Game and the Broad Street South Network. We're talking with Jovan Alford, and Jovan, it is draft time. And everybody's getting excited. They're talking about these private player workouts and visits, and of course, everybody's talking about the top of the draft and quarterbacks. So I was like, all right, let me do a little homework assignment. Um, can you? And this was a fun exercise. Can you, off the top of your head, I'll give you a minute or 2 minutes. Try to name like all as many quarterbacks as you can think of that went in the first round. Where did I go back to? Back to 2000. So just start naming some of these bonus babies. And the reason I'm doing this is after you start naming them, think about all these guys, and they were the guy coming into the draft, and we've seen so many of them not do squat in the league. I mean,
Yeah.
and so, all right, you ready?
Yep.
So, all right, go ahead.
All right. When you were saying it, the first draft class I thought about was the Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold draft class that had Josh Allen. Obviously, Allen Lamar was good, but Sam Darnold, Josh Rosen, another one of those guys that was supposed to be the chosen guy out of UCLA.
Oh yeah.
Who else? Oh my gosh. I think people might people might start putting Tua in that category, sadly, with how he was supposed to be that guy. Man, who else? Who else? Oh my gosh. Since 2000, obviously we have Vince Young, RG3, Cam, but Cam was good. Alex Smith, I think, was first round, but he had a solid career.
Mm-hmm.
Andrew Luck, obviously Luck was pretty good. I'm trying to think who else. Oh my God, Jared Goff, Carson Wentz, another one of those two guys. Oh man, who else? I'm trying to think of everybody that's starting right now. Flacco was the first rounder, but he actually was pretty good coming out the FCS.
Yep.
Uh, Mahomes was good, but Trubisky in that year wasn't that good at all.
Mm-hmm.
Fields, Pickett, Ritter,
Oof.
Malik
Yep.
Willis.
Nah, he went the first round.
Yeah, he won the first round. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but no, you did a great job though. But you saw with a lot of them, and I'll just start going over. All right, and we'll go thumbs up, thumbs down. I mean, some of these are early in their career, but I'll give a little thumbnail on some. All right, Bryce Young. I think it may be a little too early to say he's not good. I think he had 11 touchdowns, 10 interceptions with a very bad team. Obviously, his coach fired at the beginning of his career. So, what do you think of that pick? Do you think?
I
What do you
think
think
I,
about Bryce Young right now?
I think Bryce Young, like you said, it was just a bad situation. Offensive line wasn't great, and like you said, the head coach, offensive staff all get fired. So I think things will turn around with Canales, who kind of turned around Geno and Baker Mayfield, and they invested in the offensive line, which was a good sign. So I think for him starting off so poorly, I think that gives him enough of a launching pad to have a good second year.
Yeah. And then we're talking about last year's draft class. So he goes one. The number 2 pick, everybody's saying he should have picked him. And it's funny because Ohio State typically does not. They've had, you think about Cardale Jones,
Yep.
and there was a guy we met you didn't say, but I have him on a list here. Dwayne Haskins, who was on RIP. He's deceased, but it was 2019. He was a number 15 pick.
Yep.
And it just shows you, man, he was first rounder. He did not perform well for his unfortunate death, and then he was traded to the Steelers. But C.J. Stroud, I mean, there's nothing but positives on him. He's 2023 Offensive Player of the Year. But what are you thinking in terms of him?
Oh, I think, like you said, he's kind of dispelled the myth that Ohio State quarterbacks can't get it done. I think he ended up in a great situation. He had a good head coach that had a system and that was attached with a guy that also came from the same team that was running the same system.
Yeah.
They put pieces around him to let him to just kind of just play. And I think that's the difference, right? Bryce Young didn't really have. He had the talent, but not really. But he also didn't have the offensive line. I think the system that Stroud was in was very conducive to just let him go play ball and hey, just go throw the rock around to Dalton Schultz and Tank Dell and Noah Brown. Like, go do that,
Yeah.
run the ball, and just have fun. And I think the offensive coaching staff put them in favorable situations to be successful. So
Yeah, and you have some great points there because you talk about the landing spots, and we talk about some of these quarterbacks and how they were, all conference or Heisman Trophy winners, and they go to a bad team with a coaching staff. A lot of times that's led by a defensive guy that doesn't even give a crap about the offensive side, and it's all downhill from there.
mm-hmm.
So sometimes it's a tough situation, and a lot of these young guys are not ready to handle it. Obviously, I've said this for a year. I do watch some college football, but I'm more leaning towards a pro side because college football is easy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's one read for these quarterbacks. a lot of times it's a guy that's bigger, faster, is going to catch the football and make a play, and it's just kind of easy. And the NFL is hard work, and I think that some of these guys coming to the league, and I talked to a couple of them, particularly guys that were former on the Eagles when I covered the team. I talked like Michael Vick, um, even Vince Young. When I talked to them, they both were like, "Look, early in my career, I could get away with a lot of stuff,
Yep.
you know." And then
Mm-hmm.
once teams figured them out, drop coverages, spied them, a
Yep.
bunch of stuff. That's where the work started. You had to do film study and you had to be a student of the game. And sometimes I think some of these younger players, they just don't realize how hard the NFL is. And the next thing you know, like Zach Wilson, you know,
Yeah.
he,
He's
he it
another
was
one.
easy for him at BYU. And
Right.
it's hard work in the NFL. And next thing you know, you're out of the league or you're being a lot of these guys on this list were traded, moved around. Um, One of the next guys on the list, you think about 2022, Kenny Pickett was the only first round quarterback taken that year.
Mm-hmm.
And 2022, that's a crazy draft because you named a couple of the guys Desmond Ritter, you had Pickett, Sam Howell, Bailey Zappi, Malik Willis. They were all the top quarterbacks taken in 2022. Who was the best quarterback taken in 2022, though? Who was
Man.
it? And
E-
so you're forgetting it, and that'll make it his title. Well, they say, oh, because he's Mister.
oh, Purdy.
Exactly, Mister Irrelevant. Brock
Relevant.
Purdy
Yeah, Mr.
was the
Relevant.
best quarterback taken in 2022, and you're seeing that all these other guys kind of. It's a crapshoot sometimes at the top of the draft with some of these bonus baby quarterbacks. We'll just talk about a couple more of them before we get into this year's group. Anthony Richardson, he had the shoulder injury. I thought he had he's moving along. He played 4 games. He threw for 577 yards, had 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. He rushed the ball 25 times, had 136 yards and 4 TDs. But I think he's going to have to change his game because all he has to do is look at recent history right there with the Indianapolis Colts and
Yep.
what happened with Andrew Luck in
Yep.
terms of taking hits. So, what are you thinking when you Anthony Richardson going into the 2024 season for the Colts?
I think, like you said, he has to do a better job of taking care of himself, knowing when to give himself up, and to go out of balance. Like it's okay, right? You don't have to try to, you bowl guys over. I mean, Josh Allen still tries to do it, but I'm pretty sure Bills fans are probably, holding their
Oh,
breath every time
yeah,
he does it because the quarterback, and if you have a good one, is essential to success. And I think for him, and I think it's also good that he has a head coach in Shane Steichen that won't put him in danger so much of an offensive mind. And he has obviously you'll have Jonathan Taylor with him, which is a great security blanket to have for him. So I think him getting healthy, getting stronger, coming into year 2, I think he should be really good, and he won't have to feel. And I hope he don't feel the pressure to have to carry this team because he'll be playing in an offense where it won't ask him to do so much. Like when you got a Jonathan Taylor, just give him the ball 20 to 25 times and just run it through there.
yeah. And one of the last pass quarterbacks we'll talk about, and we've seen this recently. Some of these guys have been traded because their team, they're quarterback slash GM killers, and after a while, they say, they got to give up on them. And I think a lot of times, sometimes they give up on these guys way too early. We saw a trade this off season. I want to get your comments on the Pittsburgh Steelers acquired former Chicago Bears quarterback Justin Fields. Justin Fields was the 2021 11th overall pick for the Bears. They traded up to get him. Obviously, the Bears are going to draft with the number 1 pick this offseason, Caleb Williams. So, what are your thoughts on the Steelers getting Justin Fields? I'll give my take a little bit. I thought the Steelers made out in this one. This is another one.
Mm-hmm.
Justin Fields traded for a 2025 sixth-round pick,
Yep.
which could move up to a fourth rounder with playing time. But, they traded up to get him. And I thought, why not keep him? Keep him with Caleb Williams and see from there. But what do you think on this trade? And what do you think of Pittsburgh with bringing Justin Fields?
I think I think for the Steelers, I think it's a great move, right? Like obviously they bring in Russ for the 1 year minimum, but you can kind of see the vision, right? The vision is maybe Fields doesn't start this year unless Wilson gets hurt or Wilson just doesn't play good. But the future is they probably line themselves saying we're taking a flyer. Like I said, we only got to give up a 6 round pick for a guy that could be potential starter for the next few years with the amount of talent that he has and that we have, right? And I think that's going to be the huge difference for him in his career because I feel like in Chicago he wasn't dealt the best of hands
Yeah,
because of just how many changing parts and pieces his rookie year. What he had Matt Nagy as his head coach, and he was trying to make stuff happen behind a poor offensive line and not having the weapons.
yeah,
And then first year with Eberflus, we start to see something start to happen, develop him in the running game, but the passing game, he was throwing to Darnell Mooney, Chase Claypool. Like he didn't have that number
yeah,
one guy to do it. And the offensive line was still bad. And then last year he finally gets number one guy, and it's like, oh yeah, like look, see what happens when you
yeah.
give
You saw glimpses,
right. You saw
and
the Ohio State quarterback start to show up.
and he's been around a long time. I watched him on that QB1 show when he was in high school, and then at Georgia he did some good things coming in there for them, and then he goes to Ohio State, and it's just a game breaking player. And I think for the Steelers, Fields is only 25 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And so now they have him in the building. They're going to be able to evaluate him. And then Russell Wilson, it's interesting. Rich Q and I always have this debate because he's not a Russell Wilson guy. He thinks he's done. He thinks he's cooked. You know, the Steelers were smart. They saw in Kenny Pickett a guy who just was not getting it done. He had been there since
Mm-hmm.
2022, the only quarterback taken number one that season. But he only had 13 touchdown passes in 2 years as a starter. It's just like, come on. And the Eagles, I thought, overpaid for him, to be honest
Big
with you.
time.
And
Big
and
time.
now he's going to sit here. He's not going to play behind Jalen Hurts. So,
No.
I heard Howie Roseman was enamored with him ever since watching him at the University of Pittsburgh. He's a local guy from South Jersey. We'll see there. But in terms of the Steelers, Russell Wilson, he's like 35, 36. How long do you, this was a question Rich posed me, I'll ask you. How long do you think before Wilson is benched and Fields gets his opportunity? Or benched at all, or injury? What do you think?
I don't see Russ getting benched. I think he's gonna come in with a chip on his shoulder, like he has a lot to prove after how everything went down in Denver and with Sean Payton. I feel like it's a better situation with a guy in Mike Tomlin, who I think there will be mutual respect between the two. I don't think there was mutual respect between Payton and Wilson.
Yeah, they did not get along.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that dynamic will help him a lot. Granted, he doesn't have that number one. They hope George Pickens become the number one, so they got to do something at receiver there. But I think this could be a good spot where he plays well for a year and maybe he goes somewhere else, to continue his career and maybe parlaying that to another big deal. So I don't see him getting benched. It would, or even get hurt. It would take him falling off the side, and I just don't see him falling off just yet.
Yeah, last year 26 touchdowns, only 8 interceptions, and he showed he can still get the ball out of his hands, make plays.
Hmm.
And the key thing is he's going to protect the football. The Steelers, they're all about possession. They're all about leaning on their running game, and that defense led by T.J. Watt and Highsmith and the rest of the guys getting high pressure on a quarterback. So I think this was a very, very good landing spot for the Steelers to grab Russell Wilson, and then as we said, they were even smarter playing for their future, getting Justin Fields. So that's going to be interesting in that division. A lot of good teams in that division. From top to bottom, I think that they had 3 teams make the playoffs last year, and the Browns had that big turnaround, and the Bengals probably would have been in the mix as well if Joe Burrow didn't get hurt. So interesting offseason for the Steelers. We'll see how that goes. We're talking to Jovan Alford on Lloyd Vance's Inside Football on 1029 Game, the Broad Street South Network. But we'll use that as a segue going into this year's draft, and it's private workout time, and it's pro days. And everybody, I was talking to one scouting friend of mine, and they were like, oh, man, that ball was looking good coming out of his hand and this and that. And I always harken back to, I talked to John Clayton right after he left Jamarcus Russell's workout. Jamarcus Russell. We talked about this bonus baby quarterback list. He was the number one overall pick in, I want to say, 2000. It was 2007. He was the number one overall pick going to the Oakland Raiders, and they said he had the greatest workout ever. Threw 60 balls, not a single one hit the ground. Threw flat-footed 80 yards. Every ball was a missile. Perfect placement. What are we thinking in terms of this upcoming draft class? And they're saying 4 quarterbacks can be taken in the first 4 slots. So Chicago, Washington, New England are picking the first 3 slots, and then you have Arizona. They're saying maybe they'll trade out of there because some team may be so hungry for a quarterback. So we'll start with Caleb Williams. Do you believe all the hype? Is he worth this number one pick? Are him and his dad going to be such a pain in the butt the Bears fans are going to regret taking him?
I definitely think he's worth the number one overall pick. Do I think he'll live up to the hype of how people are trying to put him as like just generational Patrick Mahomes type? No, because I feel like there's only one Patrick Mahomes, right? The same thing in basketball. There's only one LeBron. There's only one Kobe. There's only one Jordan. In the NFL, there's only one Patrick Mahomes. So I know that's what everybody should know. A lot of people say that Caleb Williams kind of his game kind of resembles of a Patrick Mahomes, the
Yeah,
broken plays and things like that. Yeah, Patrick Mahomes is doing broken plays in the NFL. He wasn't doing that in Texas Tech. Caleb Williams is doing that at USC because he had to. But I think he's going into unlike what Justin Fields had, right? Justin Fields didn't get all this, weapons at his disposal. He's going to have a ton of weapons at his disposal. The Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, DeAndre Swift in the backfield. He's have a couple of good tight ends. Like they're setting him up for success. So I think he'll have a good rookie year. I think, like you said, I think he is quarterback one in this class, even though I think you can make a strong case for Jaden Daniels to be 1B.
yeah, that's a good point you made there because the Washington Commanders been talking to some folks, and everybody's saying Drake May should probably be the pick at number 2, but I'm hearing that they're pretty enamored with Jaden Daniels. They had probably 5 guys at his workout at LSU. They were impressed by him, his movement, and Dan Quinn, I think, wants to institute like a ball control offense. And if you have a running quarterback, and they're going to lean on Robinson and some of those other backs that they have there, do you think it's Jaden Daniels at the second pick, or Drake May coming out of North Carolina?
I want to say it's going to be Jaden Daniels because of that dual threat ability. I think if you're Washington, especially knowing you're in the NFC, but also in the NFC East, right, and kind of seeing what a guy like Jalen Hurts has done for the Eagles offense. Obviously, Hurts it's not fast as Jaden Daniels, but just having that dual threat ability can change the entire complexity of an offense, let alone a game. And them, I think, adding a guy, I think Cliff Kingsbury is their OC, and him playing kind of that spread, air raid style of offense, having the ability to be, with, you know, Mahomes and Caleb Williams and even Kyler Murray over the years, I think you're Washington. I think you're enamored by the idea of maybe Kingsbury as an OC, not as a head coach, but as an OC, working with, Jaden Daniels. Because,
Yeah,
like you said, Dan Quinn probably wants to play that style of offense with ball control, with Robinson, with Austin Eckler. And Daniels, I think, is a guy that I think a lot of people coming into the year didn't think like this guy's a first round pick. Like, but he's played so well that he's elevated his game to another level, even from what we saw him at Arizona State, where he was, a
right.
young kid throwing to Brandon Ayuk and Ricky Pearsall and having Rashad White in the backfield. So if I'm Washington, I think they're going to take Daniels because that speed, if he can take care of himself like Anthony Richardson, that's the thing, right? Just don't take those big hits because he's got blown up a couple times in
Yeah,
college.
and
I
he's
feel
got a
like
slighter build. Like his
yes,
build. They say he's going to put on weight and all that, but we know during the draft process these guys get bigger and then their playing weight is, and
right.
try to impress the scouts. But he's got a thinner frame, and a
He
lot of
does.
times you have a quarterback like that, you're like, ooh, you don't want to take those big hits. I always remember talking to Michael Vick in the locker room and just being enamored, looking at him like, wow, he's taking some big hits for as small and as small his frame was.
Hmm.
because when you're a running quarterback, those hits add up because you look even at look at a guy like Cam. Like Cam was built like a statue. He's six
Right.
five, muscle 240, and he even those hits accumulated by the point that by the time he was 30, his shoulder was all messed up and he couldn't play the game that the way he used to. So
Hmm.
yeah, definitely Jaden Daniels has to watch that. There's time to make plays and times to give up on a play, kind of slide, not
Yep.
not take on, try to run over a linebacker.
Yeah.
That's not going to work. This is not high school. This is not college. And we talk about, yeah, bigger guy wins in college, but in the NFL, they're all big, they're all fast. So in looking at my mock, if Caleb goes one, Jaden Daniels two, I would think New England, they got to get a quarterback. They traded Mac Jones, got him out of there. He's going to back up. He'll be Trevor Lawrence's backup down with Jacksonville now, and that'll be good for Mac. But I think Mac was another one of those guys that was just talked up so much. They
Yes.
made him more mythical than he was. At Alabama, he was a solid guy driving a car. You know, yeah, I could drive a Mercedes C Series. You know what I mean?
Right.
And be smooth as silk. You know what I mean? And I think that's what it was in terms of Mac Jones. So, not a good fit with New England. Now, I think they will go with probably Drake May there,
Hmm.
and talk about whether it's Drake May or somebody else.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned Mac Jones because, like you said, they talked on him so much to even leading up to the draft thing, like, oh, maybe the 49ers will trade up to go take,
Yeah,
Mac Jones. But like you said, he had the luxury of playing with Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle, like two first-round picks at wide
yeah,
receivers. You can't get any better than that. But when it comes to May, I think, like you said, I think that's probably a likely spot for him. A lot of people, just reading stuff like he's that kind of that wild card of like, will he get the three? Will a team like Minnesota move up to get him? What
yeah,
is he as a quarterback? Because everybody remembers what he was in 2022, and then this past season play kind of let down a little bit. But even though this year he was backed by a very good running game in Amari Hampton at running back. So I think for him, I think New England's probably the best spot because I think the offensive coordinator Alex Van Pelt I think will help him almost like what Van Pelt was able to do with Baker Mayfield. Not saying they're the same player,
yeah,
but I think what they'll ask him, I don't think he'll have to shoulder the load in New England. I don't think they're going to put the world on him like, hey, you're going to save us because they also, added Jacoby Brissett, who I think if push comes to shove, New England probably start Brissett before pushing May into the fire and saying like, hey, here's the keys. We're going to start you week one.
yeah. And we know Jermard Mayo is a Belichick disciple, so that defense is going to play very strong with Judon and the rest of those guys, and then they're going to run the football. They want a quarterback that's going to take care of it, and obviously, Jacoby Brissett has been that veteran leader, and they'll bring him in, and he could possibly be a bridge type of guy until Drake May is ready. Now, unfortunately for Drake May, I think North Carolina. I'm like, oh no, Mitch
Yeah.
Trubisky. You know what I mean? So we'll see how he does, and the force quarterback. This has been debated a lot. And this is the season where everybody's at these workouts and they're talking about how great this guy did. There's two quarterbacks, and I wanted to see who you think's a better fit if Minnesota trades up. Now, JJ McCarthy had this huge workout. Everybody's talking about that 70-yard dime that he threw his last throw and how good he looked. And he's moved into the mix of being one of these upper echelon guys. Is it going to be JJ McCarthy, or could a guy like Michael Penix, who also had a great workout, could he jump up? But what do you think? If I'm Arizona, I would take Marvin Harrison Jr. But say they do
Okay.
want to trade out of the pick, so let's just say it's up for grabs, and Minnesota has a chance to, because we know Sam Darnold's going to not be their star. So is JJ McCarthy the guy who should be the fourth quarterback?
JJ McCarthy is giving me a lot of Mac Jones vibes of a guy that's just pumping up and talking up like, hey,
Yeah,
don't let
yeah,
this guy slip. And then it doesn't help that his former college coach is also a head coach in the NFL level, and he's
yeah.
pumping him up, saying like he's the best quarterback in this class. Like I would take him like over anybody else. Which cool, that's great, but I just don't know because I feel like at Michigan he wasn't asked to do a lot. Like he was supported by a very good defense, one of the best defenses in the country. And then he had two great running backs in Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards, kind of
Yeah.
making keeping the chains moving to put them in favorable situations and just saying, "Hey, JJ, just make a couple of good throws and we'll win the ball game." And I don't know. I don't think that's going to cut it in the NFL. I'm more intrigued by a guy like Michael Penix because of just his arm talent, his arm strength. A guy that I think that we've seen going back to his Indiana days, I think we've kind of seen that clear progression from him at quarterback. Like at Indiana, he was really raw, like just a guy where you could see that he had the zip on the passes, but the accuracy wasn't there. It was just kind of like,
Right.
yo, man, like if you just get this, like you can kind of get that skill together, then like you could be to something that I think we saw when he got into a more pass heavy offense with Kalen DeBoer at Washington. That ascension happened. So it's probably going to be McCarthy that goes that be that fourth quarterback off the board, which I feel sorry for any organization that does that because that's a lot of pressure that you're going to put on him to kind of be the guy right away.
Yeah, and I do agree with you. Like JJ, it was almost like they were like maybe one or two key throws that he had to
Yes.
make each game. And that defense was so good. They were able to shut down people. Always they were in good field position. And even the receivers they had were pretty talented. And that's a
Mm-hmm.
tough thing in evaluating these college quarterbacks. They have a bunch of 5 stars around them, and these guys, they can get open at any time. But the windows
Right.
are so small in the NFL. And when you think a guy's open, you better have the arm strength to drive it in there. I remember watching Mike Kafka,
Oh
who was
man.
he came from Northwestern, and everybody's like, oh, he's that heady quarterback. And I'm at the Eagles practice on the sidelines, and I was like, he can't throw from one hash to the other. I'm like, he's going to get that picked, And sure enough, when he got to play, the arm strength, you saw it right away, and you got to
Right.
be able to drive, and that's what
Yes.
these coaches want. That's why you see guys with big arms, like a guy in the past, like a Kyle Bowler, who was
Mm-hmm.
a washout as a first rounder.
Yes, he
He's
was.
getting another opportunity because he's got that big arm. Jeff George, same thing. They all want that guy that's able to sling the rock. So
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be interesting to see how the quarterbacks play out. And Michael Penix, I think, is going to sneak into the first round. He had a very good workout after he kind of had a subpar um, combine, and I think a lot of times they like working out in their environment. They're more comfortable there. They have their own receivers, so I
Mm-hmm.
think he's going to be a first rounder. It's going to be interesting to see about Bo Nix.
Yeah.
What's your take on him? He comes from Auburn, kind of nondescript, and you know he goes to Oregon. Once again, Oregon quarterbacks. You're like, oh, Joey
Yeah,
Harrington.
right.
What I mean? But what do you think about Bo Nix?
I think Bo Nix, I don't think he's going to be a starter, but I think he could be a very good backup in the NFL. Like, he's another guy, right? Like Penix, and they obviously ended up in the same conference, but another guy who I think we kind of saw the evolution and progression at quarterback, where at Auburn, he didn't really have that efficiency and accuracy that everybody wanted to see. And he goes to Oregon. Granted, they play the high speed spread offense, but you still got to make your throws at the end of the day, right? And I feel like he did a great job. I think his accuracy was like over 70% this year, so he was putting in some crazy numbers. I don't think he's going to be a starter, but I think he could be a very good backup. Which in the NFL, if you're a very good backup, you always stay employed.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And we're talking to Jovan Alford about the quarterbacks coming up in the 2024 NFL Draft here on Lloyd Vance Insider Football 1029 The Game, Broad Street South Network. We're winding down the show here. One other quarterback I'm going to throw at you, and I've been watching this kid a long time, and he looked like he may be the next big thing. When he was at Oklahoma, Spencer
Mm-hmm.
Rattler, big arm. I've always liked him in terms of the way he moves around the pocket. He's not that explosive athlete type of guy. They were all saying, "Oh, he only ran a 4.9 at the combine," But I always just like the way he threw the football. He's done some good things in South Carolina, had some ups and downs. Um, some scouts I talked to say he's kind of moving up the board as well, maybe into the second round.
Yeah, no, I could see him being that second round guy. I know this is a guy that my guy Emery Hunt likes a lot because of the development we've seen from him, especially his last 2 years at South Carolina, and how Emery puts it, the adversity he had to go through from Oklahoma
Mm-hmm.
to South Carolina, and I think that helped him. And I think everybody, I think at the Senior Bowl, just reading the stuff and watching stuff, everybody was impressed with how well he's playing. And I think, like you said, he's a guy that was highly touted. That everybody, we're saying what a couple of years ago, we're saying number
Yeah.
one overall pick, in this year's draft class. Last year saying that, and obviously it didn't come to fruition. But I think, like you said, he's going to be a guy in round two that a team that's not looking for that starter right away could take a chance on him. I mean, I'm thinking of teams that possibly could go there. I mean, the Rams potentially, because they don't have an heir apparent to a Matt Stafford. A team like New Orleans with Derek Carr, who wasn't that great. A team that could possibly use a young quarterback like
Yeah.
Spencer Rattler. So I think there's going to be teams that see that, okay, if we get him in our room, let him sit, and when it's his time, he could be a good quarterback. And I think he is. I think what he's going through and how he's progressed and played better from the Big 12 to the SEC, which is more of a defensive heavy conference, you got to like it. And then, like you said, the senior day circuit, he was just tremendous.
Yeah. All right, and as we move down the pike, it was interesting, Jovan. I was on your feed on X, and I saw and you've talked about it a little bit tonight, in terms of spring football. I've always said the NFL could benefit from having a good developmental league,
Mm-hmm.
a place where, and I was just talking to my son. My son plays Division III college football, and I was saying some guys aren't meant to go to college. You know what I mean?
Right.
You always see guys in the SEC. They go there and then they're junior college guys and 5-star, and they kind of end up in junior college. But just talk to me about the opportunity you think could happen with a spring league, and what are we seeing with the UFL? I did watch some of the games this weekend. I saw the punter on that fake play
Yeah.
throw that 60-some-yard touchdown, and I did see the kicker make a 64-yarder. And some teams NFL teams are talking about bringing him into camp.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you. It's kind of surprising that the NFL haven't dived into having their own development league because every other top pro league in the United States have one. Like even the MLS, they have a development
Yeah,
league. So the fact that the NFL haven't done that, especially when you have to make a lot of cuts at the end of training camp, you have to have a practice squad. What's the best way to get reps? Live game action. You can't get so many reps. There's only so many reps you can get in practice squad. It doesn't mimic the real game. So I think the NFL, they should be doing that. But overall, I think spring football is a great opportunity. I think the UFL with the USFL and XFL combining, I think that the UFL, I think, have a chance to stay around for a long time for guys that either want to get into the league or might eventually just become stars in the UFL. Like that's just their ceiling because to get to the NFL and actually stick, it's like the 1% of the 1%. Like it's very tough to stick. Now, granted, you have the stories like the Brandon Aubreys and the Cavante Turpins, like guys that blow up and play well for a year
yeah,
or two and then go and find a spot in niche in the NFL. Yeah. But for a lot of these guys, it's not going to be the chance, but maybe it's the avenue for them to continue to keep their playing career going or to, go play in the CFL in Canada. So I think it's a great opportunity. And this weekend of action, I think it was very good. I think a lot of people were kind of not worried, but kind of interested to see like how things will play out with things being merged,
mm-hmm.
leagues coming together. But you're now having the best of the best in spring football all in one league. And I think we saw a lot of good play. For me, it's always the quarterback play. How's the quarterback play? And the quarterback play, I think, was great. Matt Corral, former Carolina Panthers quarterback,
Yeah,
rough to start, but he picked it up and figured it out. Chase Garber, another guy that was recently in one of these latest draft class. He's starting quarterback in San Antonio. He looked really good. So there's a lot of young quarterback prospects and even some wide receiver skill position defensive guys that I think are going to really show up. And we could potentially see their names, getting picked up at towards the beginning of summer where we're seeing these guys get a look in training camp. So far, so good. The play's been really good. And I think people, if they haven't gotten a chance to watch it, you might be surprised because, like you mentioned earlier, you will see some things you've never seen before, such as the punter Brad Wing throwing a 60-yard bomb.
yeah. Brad Wing. I remember when I think he was on the Jets and the Eagles camp at one point
Yeah,
too. So
yeah.
so you're going to see some, and that's the thing. Maybe there's some names, guys you watch in college or former NFL preseason guys, and you're getting an opportunity. And I think they've done it right. Now having one league is
Hmm.
good. Last time it was two leagues. It was just the saturation point was just too much. And now every game is going to be televised, whether it's on Fox, ABC, or ESPN. So you're going to be seeing a lot of UFL. I think in the back of their mind, the NFL's thinking, okay, maybe we can utilize some of this. We'll see if that ever
Hmm.
happens. I know in the past the NFL York was just too much. There were some guys that I talked to that were involved in that, and they were talking about the cost of it and housing players over there. And there were some good fan bases, but there were other places where they didn't even care, that they were playing. So I think it by putting us in some of the non NFL cities like Birmingham, San Antonio, St. Louis, which lost their team.
Yeah.
Their attendance records are high. I think there are like 30, 40,000 people attending
Yeah.
these games.
They
So
show up.
some
Battlehawk
people are
fans show
watching.
up big time.
Yeah. And then you're going to have arena football kicking it off soon. You have the Soul. I saw they came out their uniform. So there's still some football out here for us NFL junkies, and there's something to watch. And before you know it, it'll be training camp in late July. So, but we appreciate Jovan Alford jumping on. I'm sure we'll get him back as we get closer to the draft. Everybody's got their mock out there, so we'll talk about like. I'll throw real quick. Who the Eagles probably going defensive line?
Yep. Eagles
That's what
going
I'm
defensive
thinking.
line. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, I think the same. I think it'll probably be defensive line. There's a very offensive line heavy draft as well, so they'll probably be the two areas. And I don't want to hear my Eagles fans um, hit me up right away. Oh, what, they don't need that pick. But I think that's where Howie Roseman's going to go. But we appreciate Jovan Alford jumping on Lloyd Vance's Insider Football on 1029 The Game, Broad Street South Network. Angel did a great job once again behind the scenes on the ones and twos, our producer. And thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you next week.